Hey there, listener, and welcome back to another episode of That's Debatable. I hope you're having a great week. I hope you're having a great end to April. I can't believe we're already going to be entering into May, although I can't lie, I am pretty excited about it. I'm ready to get into the warmer months to start kind of enjoying summer. And school's wrapping up for me personally, and I'm sure for students around the country, and I know we're all kind of just ready to get off Zoom and go in the outdoors. So I hope you're doing great. I hope you are healthy. I hope your family is healthy. And I hope you're ready for this episode of That's Debatable. So before I talk about today's topic, which is actually really important to me, I really want to kind of get personal and I want to explain to you guys a little bit about how I ended up doing this podcast, how I ended up in journalism, how I ended up doing what I'm doing right now and kind of just getting into the weeds of that. So I believe I talked about this a little bit on an earlier podcast, but I really didn't feel like I gave it what it deserved. And I think that what I want to talk about today really fits in with that. So I decided I'm just going to go over it now. So basically, I was the head captain of my high school speech and debate team. And that is where I found a love for debate and kind of for politics. So I really I tried every sport in the book when I was a kid. I played basketball, softball, volleyball, soccer. I can't even, I think that's it. I stuck with basketball the longest for sure. Almost played it in high school and then something happened and it wasn't right for me. So I ended up not playing. And so my freshman year, I kind of did nothing, kind of was trying to find out where I fit in, kind of was trying to learn about myself. And that's when, towards the end of my freshman year, I saw tryouts for the school speech and debate team. And I was like, okay, well, everyone tells me I like talking a lot, and everyone tells me I'm pretty decent at it, so maybe I should try out for the team. I made the team, and by my senior year, as I mentioned, I was the head captain of my team. So it was a good fit for me. That's kind of where this all started in high school. I remember every morning because I was in speech and debate, I would have to go to school early. And so my dad could not take or my mom could not take me and my brother to school at the same time. And so my dad, before I could drive, took me to school. And every morning my dad would have the news on. And I would kind of just end up hearing what was happening without really having a great idea. But it was kind of just always on in the background. And I think slowly but surely that's kind of where that desire to always kind of be watching and paying attention to the news kind of started. I was almost already doing it and I didn't even know I liked it that much. So that's kind of an interesting little fact. And so anyways, I was the head captain of my speech and debate team, and from there, I was like, I am going to go to law school. One of my teachers or coaches on my team was actually a practicing lawyer, and I would always ask him questions, and I'd be like, tell me about the courtroom and the process and the legal process, and how did you get into it, and how do you like it, and just everything you could think of, and I was always just obsessed with all things related to law school. I was 100% convinced I was going to go to law school. And so that meant that I was going to study political science. And so I applied to APU as a political science student, got in, and I was a political science major, and that's what I wanted to do. And I thought law school was great because I could either go to law school and practice law, and if I loved it, I'd keep practicing it. And if not, most members of Congress have degrees, have JDs, and I was like, that would be a great option for me if the attorney thing didn't work out. And so I just thought having a law degree would be the best step for me. And so I got into poli-sci. I'm doing my first semester, and second semester rolls around, and I apply to be on my student government. And on my student government, the way it works is essentially there are kind of like the three branches of government, and freshmen run for the House of Representatives, upperclassmen can run up to be senators, and then the executive branch is just made of people who have served in the student government before, regardless of where. And so I ran for I did not run my freshman year. I ran at the end of my freshman year for my sophomore year to be a senator. And I was running. There are a few senatorial positions, and usually they either phase up into the executive branch or kind of decide that's not what they want to do. And so usually they run a lot of open seats. And I happen to be running for the one contested position. And I remember it clear as day, I ran essentially an entire campaign based on the fact that I did not believe in APU's curfew policy, which is a long story and I won't get into it, but I ran on that one thing, which is kind of funny, and it's how I ended up getting into journalism, so I ran on that one thing and I ran the only contested seat and I lost. And that was really heartbreaking for me because I was like, okay, well, getting into my student government, it was the first step for me to getting onto that path for whether I go into government, whether I go to law school, whatever I do. I thought that was a great first step. So that was really hard for me. And that was at the end of my second semester of my freshman year. And at the beginning of the second semester of my freshman year, to kind of preface all that, I joined my student newspaper, not as really anything important to me. It wasn't like the biggest thing ever. Essentially, what had happened was that I saw an article in the newspaper that I thought was kind of biased. And I was like, I think there's another side to this story and I would like to cover it. And so I asked around about my student newspaper and if I could take that class. I was already in a communications class because I was thinking about adding on a minor. And so taking a journalism class wasn't too far a stretch. So I asked around and I ended up taking that journalism class. It was an introduction journalism class and it's called Student Workshop, which is our student newspaper. And so during the time that I was running for SGA, I was contributing as just a student, writing a few articles for the student newspaper. And one of the articles I happened to mention, as I mentioned, was about curfew and how I felt about it, and how I felt APU was dealing with it. And from there, the week that I found out that I did not make it on SGA, my professor for the student workshop actually came to me and offered me a job. And he asked me to be the opinion editor for the school newspaper. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know I cared that much about journalism. And I think that he saw something in me that I didn't know I truly cared about. And so I accepted the position. I was an opinion editor my first semester of my sophomore year. I started my own column called That's Debatable, where every week we'd publish a story from opposing sides, and it was from everything from the most highly contested political debates on climate change and being pro-life versus pro-choice to silly things such as like, is a hamburger or a hot dog better? So that is something that I'm really proud of that I left the opinion section with, and since then I have actually been promoted to the news editor. So that's how I fell into journalism. I'm still obsessed with politics. I'm actually doing both majors now. That's kind of where my intersection is, and that is why I am so passionate about the topics that we are going to talk about today. That is the media. I want to talk about how the media, I believe, is extraordinarily biased in every direction. I think that we are really at a crossroads right now, and I think that the idea of objective news that, for example, I'm taught in my classes is really hard to come by these days, and I honestly think it is a dying art, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I'm going to be completely upfront with you in this initial outset before I kind of get into the stories I want to talk about. I think objective news is dying, and I think that's fine. I also think that we need to get clear-cut answers when we can, and when we can make stories objective to make them. But when we have biases, have them and admit them. And that's the bottom line. And that's kind of like my rationale behind creating That's Debatable, is every journalist has a perspective, has an opinion, has an idea on how something should run. And we shouldn't just deny those. We should instead work with them and allow people to digest news from both sides of the spectrum and then decide what they feel, rather than giving them our opinion and then telling them it's objective fact. That is where the problem lies in our media today. And I think that America was founded on this kind of idea. I mean, the Federalist Papers are the best example of this. Men got together, established a point of view, and passed it out to the American people to convince them to ratify the Constitution. And that was just what they wanted to do. That's what the men did. And guess what? In response, the Anti-Federalist Papers were written. And that's how the American media was born, essentially, is people publishing their two sides of the story to see who can make the better argument to the public. And I think that's totally fine. Unfortunately, instead of admitting those biases, we try to pass them off as objective news far too often. I want to talk about 3 different instances in which this was the case. So, the first one is a couple years ago. The media reported this story of the junior from Covington Catholic High School who was on a class trip. This was the story about Nick Sandmann that CNN actually ended up getting sued for. Basically, it was a 20-second video of the 17-year-old while he was in Washington, D.C. for the March for Life rally. He and his classmates were caught waiting in front of the Lincoln Memorial for the bus to pick them up. And while they were standing in front of the memorial, a video surfaced, and it seemed to show that Nick and his classmates were engaging behavior such as chanting, build the wall, and potentially harassing women. It kind of wasn't entirely clear what happened in the video. And it seemed to show that he and his classmates were attacking, if not harassing, an elderly Native American Vietnam veteran who was protesting for the land back. And the allegations were further proven because the man, Nathan Phillips, was interviewed with CNN, in which he talked about how the Catholic schoolboys that surrounded him and the anger was directed towards him to say they wanted the freedom. He actually said in this interview with CNN that he wanted, quote, the freedom to just rip me apart. That was scary, and I'm a Vietnam times veteran, and I know the mentality of, quote, there's enough of us, we can do this. So that was really hard when that video surfaced, to justify the boys' actions, to understand what was actually happening, to understand everyone's point of view. And then a full 2-hour clip was later released that showed the whole story. It turned out the man never was actually deployed to Vietnam. There was actually an African-American Israelite group chanting horrifying racial slurs at the Catholic boys. Things that I'm not going to repeat. And it seemed at the end of the day that Nick Sandmann had actually stopped his friend from engaging with the other group, and he did not attack or touch anyone during this interaction. And he simply, the Native American Nathan Phillips actually walked up to him and banged the drum in his face. And the statement was released by the young boy that matched the longer video, not the shorter video. So that was something that really struck the media for a very long time. I mean, that was really hard. CNN ended up getting sued over it. It was not a great thing that the media ran with that so quickly in the beginning without waiting for the longer video. And that's literally only one example of the media doing this time and time again. And it just shows that the media had their agenda and they were going to stick with it. And they were not waiting for the facts. They were not waiting to be proven right. They were just going with what they saw in front of them. What's more, this is the second story I want to talk about. And this story is really, really frustrating to me. So this story is about Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, and the border. And it is about news outlets reporting, specifically the New York Post, reporting that Vice President Harris, who was now put in charge of the border crisis, was sending her books to children at the border for them to read. And the initial response to this was, of course, as it should have been, outrage. Except it was only coming from the right. They were infuriated that she would even dream of doing that. Everyone was talking about what if Donald Trump had done something similar? What if Trump had tried to send his book out to children at the border? What would the media response be then? And it was just complete chaos and madness. So essentially the story was that she was sending those stories out. There were, to just kind of go over a few people, Fox and Friends pushed the story. Steve Doocy said, quote, "You continue to come to this country and that's what you end up with. Wondering if the government is paying for the book." Sean Spicer made comments about it. It was talked about a lot on Fox News. House Minority Leader Steve Scalise mentioned something. I believe that Kevin McCarthy said something on this. I believe that many different people commented on this, even though the story, which is the story that I'm reporting, the story is entirely false. So the Washington Post has a headline out right now. A New York Post story about Kamala Harris triggered conservative outrage. Almost all of it was wrong. Now the reporter has resigned. This is a story by Paul Farhi. reported yesterday. A long time ago, New York Post reporter said a long time New York Post reporter said she has resigned after being, quote, ordered to write a false story that claimed undocumented minors were being welcomed to the United States with copies of a children's book written by Vice President Harris. The Kamala Harris story, an incorrect story I was ordered to write and which I failed to push back hard enough against, was my breaking point, Laura Italiano tweeted Tuesday afternoon, several hours after her viral article about the books had been deleted from the Post website and replaced with corrected versions. Italiano, who's ran for the Post since the 1990s, according to the news archives, could not be immediately reached for comment. Since the Post published a story on its front page Saturday, the conservative mediascape has been in an uproar over the supposed distribution of Harris's 2019 book, Superheroes Are Everywhere, at migrant shelters. On Tuesday, in a one-sentence note at the bottom of the original article, the Post acknowledged that almost none of it was true. There was an editor's note, and it read, quote, the original version of this article said migrant kids were getting Harris's book in a welcome kit, but it has been updated to note that only one known copy of the book was given to a child. So, this story, to be frank, really frustrates me because it was just honestly a completely false story. The reporter who reported the story claimed that she was ordered to write a completely false story, which was no evidence, and she had no way to push back against it. And then when the media outrage came and people were like, this is totally false, which I believe the Washington Post actually found, she tweeted that she sent in her resignation and that she couldn't handle it anymore. So it's kind of, who knows if she felt that beforehand or if that was just her response to getting a lot of backlash for it. But the bottom line is that the media entirely reported a fake story. The story had little to no truth in it. There was one book that came out. Kamala Harris was not the one distributing them, and yet the media was willing to force their writer to write a false story on the subject just because it fit in with their agenda. Now, this is obviously a story meant to attack Kamala Harris, and it came entirely from the right. This is not only the right, this is not only the left. This story is a little different, but equally, if not more shocking. So, Stacey Abrams, who lost the governorship to, I cannot remember his name right now, in Georgia. She lost the Georgia gubernatorial race to Brian Kemp, that's correct. And she has not left the media since. She's been a very big advocate for President Joe Biden, arguably help him win the state, help turn the state blue, even though it's a little purple, if not more red. So I'm going to preface this with the Georgia law and going over what happened. So in the month of April, the state of Georgia is purportedly going to lose over $100 million in revenue because the MLB decided to move its All-Star game and draft out of the state after the state passed new laws. The law itself, which was deemed too harsh by the left and not harsh enough by those like former President Trump, created a new regulation surrounding early voting, voter ID, and ballot drop boxes. The main fears were that it would harm minority voters and disenfranchise their votes. MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred shared that the move was the best way to, quote, demonstrate values as a sport. So all of that is to say the Georgia voting law, which was controversial, is the reason for all of this beginning. Now, how does Stacey Abrams play into this? Stacey Abrams wrote an op-ed about the Georgia law and why businesses should boycott when the law was passed before the MLB actually did the boycott. The MLB then decided they were going to boycott Georgia because of the law, and USA Today allowed Stacey Abrams to edit the op-ed without an editor's note and change the part of her story that called for boycotts, saying that they should not have boycott. So they changed the fundamental part of the story, and this was not a news story, only reported by Fox. From what I can see after a long search, the headline is USA Today edited Stacey Abrams' op-ed published before MLB pulled game out of Atlanta, waters down boycott support. USA Today appeared to have bizarrely allowed retroactive edits of an op-ed written by prominent Georgia Democrat Stacey Abrams in an effort to water down her previous justification for boycotts. In a piece published on March 31st, That's days before the MLB announced that move. Abrams defended the national response to what she called the, quote, racist, classist legislation. This is what Abrams originally wrote. Quote, the impassioned response to the racist, classist bill that is now the law of Georgia is to boycott in order to achieve change. Events hosted by Major League Baseball, world-class soccer, college sports, and dozens of Hollywood films hang in the balance. At the same time, activists urge Georgians to swear off of hometown products to express our outrage. Until we hear clear, unequivocal statements that show Georgia-based companies get what's at stake, I can't argue with an individual's choice to opt for their competition. However, one lesson of boycotts is that the pain of deprivation must be shared to be sustainable. Otherwise, those least resilient bear the brunt of these actions, and in the aftermath, they struggle to access the victory. Boycotts are complicated affairs that require long-term commitment to action. I have no doubt that voters of color, particularly black voters, are willing to endure the hardships of boycotts, but I don't think that's necessary yet. I ask you to bring your business to Georgia, and if you're already here, stay and fight, stay and vote. The article was updated on April 6th, and this is the new commentary. The impassioned and understandable response to the racist, classist bill that is now the law of Georgia is to boycott in order to achieve change. Events that can bring millions of dollars to struggling families hang in the balance. Major League Baseball pulled both its All-Star game and its draft from Georgia, which could cost our state nearly $100 million in lost revenue. Rather than accept responsibility for their craven actions, Republican leaders blame me and others who have championed voting rights. Their faux outrage is designed to hide the fact that they prioritize making it harder for people of color to vote over the economic well-being of all Georgians. To add to the injury, the failed former president is now calling for cancellation of baseball as the national pastime. Boycotts invariably also cost jobs. To be sustainable, the pain of deprivation must be shared rather than borne by those who are least resilient. I have no doubt that voters of color, particularly black voters, are willing to endure the hardships of boycotts, but such monetary loss is unlikely to affect the stubborn, frightened Republicans who see voter suppression as their only way to win. Money isn't quite as seductive as political power to put to these putative leaders. Her her revised version also adds, quote, instead of a boycott, I strongly urge other events and productions to do business in Georgia and speak out against our law and similar proposals in the state. When called out about this, there was the spokesperson for USA Today's parent company, which is called Gannett, told Fox News, quote, we regret the oversight in updating Abraham's column. As soon as we recognized there was no editor's note, we added it to the page to reflect her changes. We have reviewed our procedures to ensure this does not occur again. So not only did they edit the story, they didn't tell people that they edited the story. And then when they told people they edited the story, the editor's note says, let me see if I can find it. Quote, this column was originally published before the MLB moved the All-Star game. It was updated after that decision. So it doesn't even say what the note is. It doesn't even say what was actually changed about the story. It just says that the story was changed, even though the story was essentially changed to say the exact opposite of what it was saying. So that is just messy journalism. I don't want to get too far deep into critiquing anyone, but that is, I think, objectively not a clean-cut way to do journalism. I'm not a fan of that, and so I thought it would bring it to your attention. So what I really want to take away from this is the fact that the media is biased, and that's fine, but they need to admit their bias. The media can be biased. We're human beings. We all have an opinion. There's only so much we can do to be objective, and that's fine, but we just can't pretend that we're the only ones spewing the truth, and we're really not. There are so many people out there that have opinions, that have different points of view, and that's fine, but we just need to accept that. The media can have an agenda, but they shouldn't. They should be the voice for the people. They should be the truth. They should be the ones willing to hold the government accountable when the people can't. And if the media is not going to be held accountable, then I'm not sure what happens. And I think what's so important is that this is not just about the media, it's about us. And we have to hold ourselves accountable too. We have to stop being so quick to jump on bandwagons that before we actually look at the facts. We have to realize that the burden falls on us to decide what we trust and what we can believe and where we're getting our stories from and Are we letting the full details of the story come out before we're making a decision? So the burden, unfortunately, is falling on the people to hold the media accountable. It always has. It's more present than ever before now, and we really need to start paying attention to that. So I think what I want you to take away is just that the media is biased, and that's fine, and I'm not calling them out on it, and I'm not saying, oh, it's a bad thing. I'm not saying, oh, it's terrible. I'm merely suggesting the media is biased, and we as a society need to be aware of that, and the media needs to admit it, and we need to all stop pretending that objective truth is the golden standard, because it is, and it exists, and it's out there. But when it comes to reporting, there are a few stories that are clear cut and dry to be relating to objective truth, and that is hard. But the media must be held accountable, and truth is not subjective, it is objective, and we have opinions. There's my opinion, there's your opinion, and there's the truth. And that's the inspiration behind That's Debatable, right? Is that we all have different opinions and different points of view, but there is one truth, and we're all working towards it. So we need to all stop claiming that it's on our side, because it's on no one's side, it's on God's side. And that leads me to what I want to talk about this week. So I want to go to John in the Bible this week. I have a few different passages I think I want to read from John, which I'm sure you can guess most of them if you've ever read John or if you know about John 14. So I first am going to go to John 8:32. Excuse me. That is, I'm going to start a little before that. I am going to start at John 8:30, which reads, "As he spoke these words, many believed him. Then Jesus said to those Jews who believed him, 'If you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free.' They answered him, 'We are Abraham's descendants and have never been in bondage to anyone. How can you say you will be made free?' And Jesus answered them, 'Most assuredly I say to you, whoever commits a sin is a slave of sin, and a slave does not abide in the house forever, but a son abides forever. Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed.'" Which is just a beautiful passage about the truth, and Jesus saying that the truth shall set you free. And then we hear that, after hearing that the truth shall set you free, we then hear in John 14, starting at the beginning, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And where I go, you know, and the way you know." And Thomas said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you are going, and how can we know the way?" And Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me." So after hearing in John 8 that the truth shall set you free, we later see Jesus say he is the truth. Therefore, Jesus shall set you free. Later in John 16, verse 13, just quickly, these two additional verses. John 16:13 says, However, when he, the Spirit of truth, has come, he will guide you into all truth, for he will not speak on his own authority, but whatever he hears, he will speak, and he will tell you things to come. And finally, John 17:17, which is more of a command, reads, "You are not of the..." This is 17. I'm going to start with 17:15. "I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth." And I think that's Jesus talking to God, that his word is truth. And I think that what's so important about these passages is that we are here for a job so much bigger than lowercase t truth of the media. We are here for a job that is so much bigger than lowercase t truth of the matter, whether or not the sky is blue, whether or not someone did something to you, whether or not someone told a lie, whatever it may be. We are here for something so much bigger than that, and we are here to spread the capital T truth. And that is what I want us to all focus on. We are here to spread the word of Jesus Christ. And Jesus is, as he mentioned, he is the truth. He is the way, he is the light, and no one will get through the Father but through him. And we must remember that Christ is the ultimate version of the truth, and he's going to set us free. And if we're not being the light for people to see the truth of Christ, then what are we accomplishing? If we're arguing about lowercase t truth, about who in the media got a story right, if we're arguing about who says what they mean, if we're arguing about whether or not someone's word is true, what are we doing if we're not actually pointing people back to the capital T truth? And it's not about being truthful. It's about the fact that every truth should lead us back to the ultimate truth. And I think that is why we need to admit to ourselves that the media is going through what they're going through, and that they all have opinions, and that we all have opinions, and that's fine, again. But we all need to accept that our word is all we have, and our word is if we're not telling the truth, if we're speaking lies, if we're speaking the ways of the devil, then we're not pointing people towards Christ, and we are not doing all that we can be doing to spread the word of God and to spread the love of God and to remind people that he is the ultimate truth. And that's all we're here to do. So remember, when you're intaking your media, remember when you are reading whatever you're reading, that people have opinions, and that's fine. But if someone tells you they are preaching the truth and they are the objective one, and it's not Christ, just take everything with a grain of salt. And remember that it's your job to spread the capital T truth about Christ. And that's it. Just remember your calling as a Christian is what I'm trying to do in these times. So thank you guys for listening again. Reminder to keep your prayers big and keep your worries small. And thank you for watching That's Debatable with Jasmine Campos.